Hey folks, welcome back to Inside the Songs. Today I am welcoming Yvonne Hartmann, who's joining me from Germany, I believe. Yvonne, thank you so much for your time today. Yvonne, you spent 7 years as a graphic designer at Native Instruments, and now you have your own business working in artist branding, where you are primarily helping music artists to develop their own visual identities across all the different media. So through print and digital, social media, packaging, motion design, photography, the whole lot, looking to help artists design cohesive branding to present themselves to the public. Is that right? Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's right, actually.
Great.
Yeah, help them to, create their own unique artist brand from definition to execution.
Perfect. So let's dive straight in. I've got loads of things that I want to ask you on this kind of subject matter. So can you tell me, how do you define visual branding in the context of music? And what do you think makes a strong brand identity for an artist?
Yeah, I think visual branding includes the use of all visual elements to create a distinctive and recognizable image or identity, including graphical elements, photos, imagery, videos, merchandise, social media, and for art, like musicians, especially also stage design or performance aesthetics. And a strong brand identity for me creates a cohesive experience around the music that goes beyond the music and that connects with the audience.
Yeah. And I think consumers of music, that they're looking for more than just good songs. The songs are the byproduct of a well-branded artist package, right? But people primarily connect with and engage with the artist first, and then the music is the stuff that they like from the artist. But if they're not connecting with an artist, then they're probably not going to get as far as the music. So the branding and the cohesiveness of how an artist is presented is a really crucial step in the journey to attracting more audience, I would say.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the case. Sometimes you get in touch with the music first, but sometimes you get in touch with the artist first. So I think it's more and more important to have this whole package, this whole experience to offer that goes beyond the music, because, yeah, people want to connect, and that helps to have the music resonate. Unfortunately, good music nowadays is, in most cases, not enough to be successful as a musician or band.
Yeah, I agree entirely. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see artists and labels making when it comes to their branding?
I've seen a lot, what I've seen a lot of times is that artists get really stuck in the details because, especially if they're independent artists, they have so much to do. They have to release the next Instagram post or a song, then prepare the next gig, and they lose this big picture of what they represent and what their message is. So they don't have a clearly defined strategy and not defined, like, what is the message? What are the goals actually? What do I want to achieve with my music? And that leads to the second mistake, which is inconsistency in the communication, which leads to mixed messages and can confuse the audience rather than engage with them. And also what I experience a lot is that there's not enough time for concept planning when it comes, for example, to release campaigns. Often I get a request for, album art or a whole campaign that they need within, a few weeks or even less. So there's unfortunately not enough time for like a well thought out concept for the campaign, which leads to poor or no storytelling and a lack of impact and connection. And if you plan ahead of time, you can do so much more and have a bigger impact.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things that kind of is saying to me. One is, if you're an independent artist, there are so many different hats that you have to wear. You have to be a songwriter and a musician first, maybe a producer as well, but then you need to be a content creator, you need to be a promotional strategist, a marketing strategist, you might be a graphic designer of a sort, you might need to be running your own website, your own booking agent. there are so many different facets to being an independent artist that it can be overwhelming. And what artists therefore tend to end up doing is just going, well, I focus on the music and I've got the music and now I'm just in a hurry to get the music out into the world because the music's great and I just want to put it out there. And then it's out there and nobody listens to it because there's no strategy behind getting it in front of people. And with, you know, however many thousands and thousands and thousands of songs are released every day onto DSPs, if you haven't got a strategy, it will go nowhere. Like the music will just sit there and get zero streams. So you must, as difficult as it is to sit on the pot of gold that is your music, you must do it justice by investing in a strategy to try and get it in front of people. Otherwise, nobody will hear it.
Yeah, that's really sad sometimes, because you see how artists and a lot of other people put so much work and effort and love and passion into this piece of music, of art. Then when the release date comes, it kind of like, pops up and then it's gone.
Yeah.
If there's a strategy behind it, and you can add so much details and make it really special, and then have like a more long-term effect as well.
Yeah. And it just makes me think of, like, at the moment, I don't know if you're on TikTok, but TikTok is just flooded with people talking about Sleep Token at the moment. They've got this massive mystery campaign going on, full of riddles and things for people to solve and having to choose between two different houses or something they're called, one with swords and one with a feather. And everyone's like, what is going on? I don't know what it is. And then there's this other band, President, who have been billed on download and nobody knows who President are. And is it linked to Sleep Token? And just all this hype being created about something that nobody really knows anything about. And that's all part of their strategy, which means that when whatever it is that they're alluding to comes out, people are going to consume it because there's been so much build-up. And yeah, of course you can do that when you have major label backing and all that stuff. But it just shows to what extent you can go to build a strategy if you've got the creativity behind it.
Definitely.
So with those things in mind, what are some of the most crucial aspects that you see being overlooked in terms of artist branding?
I think most or a lot of people, they connect branding with the more obvious elements, such as a logo, a cover artwork, graphical elements, etc. But a lot of people don't see that branding includes so much more than that, than the visual side of it. So basically, any decision that you make on a daily business as an artist or as a label can have a positive or a negative effect on your image or your brand. And with that in mind, you can make more cohesive decisions. This can be, for example, choosing the way you talk to your audience or press, or the collaboration partners you choose. So it's much more than just these obvious elements of logo, color palette, etc.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying about the way that you talk and the way you choose to interact is a key part of that. Part of my identity as an artist is that I try and position myself as somebody that knows about music production and wants to build a community of people that want to know about the music industry as a whole. And that's why I do this podcast, and that's why I produce educational content. That's part of my identity and strategy, and I always talk to people in a polite and informative way. That's who I am. And you look at other artists, I look at someone like Ronnie Radke, for example, who he positions himself as this real like bad boy, kind of don't care about the fans, I do what I want, whatever. That has its own impact on how people perceive him, and I'm sure that's a very deliberate thing. I don't know Ronnie Radke at all, but that's a choice. It's all a choice. Mm-hmm. And everything that you do is a choice and should be considered, as you say, as part of branding as a whole. So can you give me an example of an artist or a company, maybe it's someone that you've worked with or maybe not, that you think has a really strong brand, and what makes them stand out?
So one example I like to reference, I haven't worked with her, but I really like her brand, is a Berlin-based Canadian musician and producer, Peaches. Her work often addresses LGBTQ plus rights and gender fluidity, and that makes her a significant figure in the queer community and beyond. And this commitment to her values and her message, which is, it doesn't matter who you are or where you're from, what matters is who and where you want to be, are evident in everything she does, from provocative lyrics to stage design, costumes, and bold imagery. So she maintains this consistent focus on themes like empowerment, sexuality, and rebellion, which resonates deeply with her audience. And I think this is a really, an authentic experience she creates.
And by being that clear about her messaging, it allows her audience to understand her. There's no confusion, there's no grey area, and therefore I suppose people know what they're going to get with her. There's no surprise that all of a sudden she's going to give you a song about, I don't know, something wildly political, or I don't know. I'm picking things off the top of my head, but being clear about that, it allows people to engage in an informed way as to what they're going to get, which is crucial, I think. I want to ask you about your time at Native Instruments a little bit, because branding for a tech firm, essentially, like that, is going to be very different to artist branding. So in that sort of industry where software and technology can feel really impersonal, what is it that companies like Native Instruments do to try and create emotional connections with their users in the same way as, say, Peaches does as a performance artist? What can tech firms do to try and get a similar kind of connection?
Yeah, I think storytelling is key here, because we connect more deeply when we relate to stories behind brands or products, as we already mentioned. So at Native Instruments, for example, they've always focused on building a strong community of users and collaborators, including artists, producers, or DJs. And by partnering with influential artists, for example, and demonstrating these real-world product use cases, companies can boost their credibility and stay relevant in the industry, but also inspire their audience in a way.
Yeah, and for someone like myself, when I use so many different products from so many different companies every day, actually I am now at the stage where if I don't engage with even the ethos of a company, I'll use somebody else, because there are so many options out there that kind of engagement and that understanding and belief in the ethos of something or somebody is key. I mean, for me, it was a year or two ago, and Waves decided that they were going to try and force all their users onto a subscription model, and the internet went absolutely bananas about it. They're like, you can't do this, you're just money grabbers, blah blah blah. And so many people got turned off from using Waves products, myself included. And I just think you've got to be so careful about how you look after your users, because with everybody having the ability to talk about you so freely online, you used to say that there's no such thing as bad press, but I think nowadays there definitely is such thing as bad press in that sort of context. So how does branding for a music tech company differ then for branding for an artist or a label in terms of your approach, I suppose?
I think it doesn't really differ so much as far as the process is concerned. So the key points are similar or the same. Define the essence of your brand first, and then align everything with it to create this cohesive experience. So the basic framework is similar, but differences obviously arise in the brand components, such as the values, the goals, or the target audience, and the key considerations of like alignment areas. So for example, a company might have to think about how to align their customer service with the brand voice, like the language they use, for example, as we already mentioned. While an artist might have to consider aligning areas like stage design or merch. And in terms of brand identity, music tech companies often have a more slick and modern and tech-oriented visual identity aligning with their message of like innovation and efficiency, where brand artists are more personal and artistic brands reflecting the artist's style, the values, and aesthetic. And yeah, that's I think that's the main difference. The process itself doesn't really differ so much, in my opinion.
Cool. So can you tell me about any of the projects that you worked on at Native Instruments? What were some of the most exciting ones?
There were a lot of fun projects, but I think one that stood out to me was Noir. It's a sample instrument that features the sound of Niels Fram's custom grand piano. And it was a beautiful product, and I really liked the aesthetics. But to me, it stood out also because there was a creative process working closely with the marketing team, which I was part of, and the UX designers on a mutual design vision. And that was really fun and inspiring. And then, yeah, we had the opportunity to shoot with Niels Fram in his beautiful studio at Funkhaus. So that was the cherry on top, I guess. Yeah, I think that was one of the most exciting projects.
Nice. Yeah. I love that instrument. I literally used it on the last record that I finished. If you don't know Noir as a product, it's a grand piano, but then it's also got like, I guess you'd call it like a tempered piano and lots of different layers that you can manipulate underneath it. So you can get this really kind of expressive piano, but with synthy layers and textures underneath. And it's cool and it's beautiful and it's cinematic and it's fun. So if you don't know it, go check it out. Great. So let's move back to the artist scene now. How do you think that artist branding has changed over the last decade or so? Are there any like big trends that have become super important, or anything that, absolutely artists should be thinking about now that perhaps they didn't need to 10 years ago?
I think it has changed significantly in different ways. I think one of the areas is, that there are a lot more like cross-industry collaborations between artists and brands, particularly in fashion and lifestyle. Social media as well brought a lot of more importance to storytelling and a consistent look and feel. And there are also more opportunities in branding. For example, before you just needed a cover artwork and an EPK, for example, some photos and maybe a couple of music videos. Now there are many more opportunities for branding, especially online, like from profile banners, Spotify canvas to NFTs. There is also a lot more interaction with fans, which opens new opportunities like fan-driven initiatives and user-generated content. But I think in this sea of opportunities, again, it's important to have a clear vision and then pick the channels and the assets that are really relevant to you and your audience.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned user-generated content, because if anybody has seen the latest Lady Gaga campaign, like that is basically all about user-generated content. And a big part of that strategy is her going into those user videos and commenting and sharing, and that snowball effect that it's getting from people buzzing that she's interacting with their content. It's the best form of marketing that there is. There's nothing stronger than, a personal recommendation from somebody else, that word of mouth thing. So
Definitely.
if you have the ability to build that into a campaign in some way, so much the better. And you mentioned social media as well. So what role does social media play in shaping an artist's brand today?
I think it depends on your audience, but I would say in most cases it plays a crucial role nowadays. It's an opportunity to reach a broad audience worldwide with a low budget. Yeah, but again, I think artists get overwhelmed sometimes and they think they have to be on all of these platforms, but sometimes it can be also counterproductive. Maybe it's more effective and efficient to feed like 2 or 3 platforms regularly and consistently, focusing on the channels your audience actually uses, than struggling with 5 to 10 different accounts, platforms without having time to really feed any of them properly.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great piece of advice. I know I mentioned a similar thing a couple of episodes ago when I was talking to Dorian, the co-founder of Groover, and we were saying, you need to know who your target audience is and where they exist, because there's no point you being on TikTok if your target audience isn't on TikTok. There's no point you being on Instagram if your target audience isn't on Instagram. You're just wasting your time. So you need to go through that process of deciding who it is that you're trying to connect with and where they live, and putting your efforts into those places, because otherwise, as you say, you're going to spread yourself too thin and you're not going to do do anything as well as you could if you just focus on a few key areas. So I think that's such a great piece of advice. And let's talk about the rise of independent artists handling their own branding, because it's happening way more now that artists are striving to remain independent because they realize that they can build a fully functioning career without the need for major label backing, for example. So what advice would you have for musicians who don't have budget for professional art directors?
I would say first get the big picture. First define what you want to achieve and align all aspects of your brand strategically to achieve these goals. Learn some basic design techniques maybe, or photography techniques. There are a lot of techniques you can use in design, in photography to transmit certain messages or emotions. There are free design tools like Canva, for example, that are very intuitive and easy to use. And if you want to have all in one place, check out my branding courses that are like specially tailored for musicians.
Where can people find those, Yvonne?
Through my website, they can yvonnehartmann.com. There is a place where there's all the information about the different courses.
Brilliant. So if you're looking for a specific course on artist branding, then now you know where you can get all that information. There's always a balance to try and strike between honoring your own authenticity versus considering what is going to be commercially appealing. What advice would you have for artists that are trying to, weigh up those scales and get that balance right?
It comes down again to understanding what your core identity is and leveraging your unique qualities and understanding your audience, and then translate it into impactful assets that resonate with your brand. So creating meaningful assets. And as I said, design and photography hold a lot of good techniques to visually convey values, emotions, and strengths. A good example might be Billie Eilish, who has managed to balance authenticity with commercial appeal, staying true to her artistic vision and values, and her collaborations with big brands align with her personal style and interests. So they feel authentic rather than purely commercial. So I think it's trying to find this balance in your own interest and your own identity.
And I think sometimes new artists especially, can get so caught up in the weeds of those decision-making processes that they feel obliged to try and get everything absolutely perfect first time.
Mm-hmm.
My advice would just be learn by doing. Get stuff out, see how people respond, see what the response is, and take that feedback in order to improve for the next release. Releasing a couple of songs a year, you're never going to have the volume in order to develop that identity, and in order to figure out what it is that is connecting. You have to try some different things in the early days in order to understand what people are enjoying. If you don't, you could invest months and months of your life trying to design something that you think is amazing, fully cohesive, and it could flop, and that would be a disaster. So do as much as you can.
Yeah, also test your designs before the release. Like show them to, a small maybe sample of your target audience. See how they react on it. Or also with merch, for example, I always advise people to think a bit out of the box. Of course, tote bags and shirts are maybe the most economic ways to produce merch in most of the cases. But yeah, think about what makes sense for your release. Actually, there are maybe other products that can be maybe practical, or something that really tell the story of your album better than a shirt, maybe.
Yeah. Think outside the box. Nice. So how would you approach storytelling when it comes to working with an artist to help develop their visual identity?
So I basically dive into their core again. Like I do a workshop with them and identifying there's the story behind the music, and trying to tell this story, so that all my work is basically based on this information, like what is the story behind the album. This can be found in maybe the topics that the album addresses, the emotions that were involved in the production phase, the people that were involved in the collaborations. So there's always a story to tell. And my job is then to translate this story into meaningful assets, visual assets, and tell it in a visual way.
So would you say that from release to release, say from album to album, you're able to entirely redesign that whole branding if perhaps the subject matter is about something completely different or the artist is taking a slightly new direction? Or do you think that there needs to be still some consistency that ties various campaigns together? What do you think?
When I do a brand design for an artist, the question that comes up a lot is, okay, now I have this logo, I have a color palette, I have typography. Do I have to use these elements on all of my album covers now? And I'm always like, no, please don't do that. Because every album, of course, has its own personality and story. Now, so we have to distinguish between the overall brand elements, which is like, for example, or visual brand elements, the logo, the brand color palette, brand typography, and this is used for the long-term or regular communication, like the website, newsletter, like everything that is, their brand communication, if that makes sense. But then when it comes to albums, you have to dive into the story of each album and the personality of each album. And then I think each album or EP deserves its own little identity, which of course also should fit into this overall brand of the artist. So there should still be like a cohesive direction, but of course you don't have to use the same color scheme all the time or the same fonts.
Yeah. So there are layers, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are layers to explore. So are there any key differences in terms of branding between physical media like album artworks, like merchandise, versus digital platforms like your social networks, your DSPs, or can they be considered as one?
No, I think print adds another dimension to the overall experience, which is the sense of touch. So it opens up a lot of new possibilities on a branding level as well. For example, the material you choose or the print finishing, whether you use a spot UV coating or embossing, etc. So materials and finishing techniques can be strategically used to convey your message as well, or emotions. Online assets, on the other hand, need to be highly impactful as they only have like seconds to grab attention and drive engagement. But also one thing that I want to add to the decision of doing print materials, for example, choosing to produce print should also align with your brand values. If your music promotes sustainability, it's essential to be mindful of what, how much, and where you produce your merch, for example. So poorly considered decisions can backfire, weakening your message as well. And that's why I said like every decision can have an impact on your image.
Yeah. I love what you were saying about even just about the differences in t-shirts, like whether it's the quality of the fabric or whether it's the style of printing that's chosen. Because I think, new artists understandably so, try and do everything as cheaply as possible. But actually, if you're going to, say you go to a gig of a new artist, maybe you don't know the artist, and then you listen and you love them, and you're like, oh, they're great. Like, what can I do to support? Go check out their merch table. And then you go and there's a cheap, nasty feeling t-shirt, and you look at it and you go, well, that's going to last 3 washes and then it'll have all faded away. You're not going to buy it. Maybe you won't buy it. Versus maybe, there's a much higher quality t-shirt that, looks nice, feels nice, it's nice and soft. You think that's got a really cool design that is really interesting. Like, I want to wear it, I want to buy it. Yeah, it's more expensive for you as the artist investing in the product and for the end user. But is that going to go down better than the cheap and nasty option? Maybe not. It depends on circumstance, but you need to be thinking about those things all the way through the process. Have you got an example of a particularly creative or successful campaign that you've worked on? And if so, what made it really effective?
So yeah, last year I worked or collaborated with a singer, horn player, and producer Meravi on the release of her debut album Golden Sign. So she approached me like 8 months ahead of time, like before the release, which doesn't happen too often, unfortunately, that you have like such a long time for a release, which gave us a lot of time to create like a really thought out concept based on the album story, including some nice details. So yeah, we created 4 single covers, and the theme of the album was like gold as a color was very important because it represented the horn, which is for her is more than an instrument, is like a companion. So that was the theme of the album. And we created 4 single covers and an album, including vinyl. Each of the single covers were telling the story of the single, but tied together with the same collage-based art direction. So on each cover, we integrated numbers related to the chemical element of gold, for example, which was a little detail we added, like the boiling point, the melting point, chemical symbol, etc. And apart from being like a mysterious detail, actually, it also opened new opportunities of content creation with like a giveaway competition that we made just before Christmas, where people had to guess what these numbers represented. Additionally, the vinyl had a limited edition, including a golden vinyl and a signature with gold leaf by the artist. On the release concert, she sold handmade golden hair ribbons that she had made by herself, and they were sold out. So this is an example of like, okay, we have a lot of shirts and tote bags already, like maybe do something that is, a bit different and also makes sense in this release. And the feedback was, yeah, amazing. It was an amazing collaboration in general because there was a lot of creative freedom and mutual input that led to, create consistent experience throughout the campaign. And the feedback was amazing. It's often hard to measure the success of a good branding or design within a campaign unless you do A/B testing. It's because there are so many different aspects of a campaign. It's difficult to measure the individual things like design. But yeah, there was a lot of great feedback on the design from her fans and people who saw it.
That's super cool. And as you say, you can only go into that level of detail and be that creative with a campaign if you have the time to think about the options that you have and to come up with those ideas. If you have 4 weeks, well, then you haven't got time to do all those things.
Exactly.
I'm strategizing my next release, and I'm going to start releasing those songs in September, but I've been thinking about it since I started writing the thing last summer, and I'm all that time been thinking about what I can do and the options and how I want it to look and how I want to present it. And not that you need to spend over a year thinking about your campaign, but the more time you have to think about things, the more ideas you'll have and the more creative options you'll end up with. So
exactly,
give yourselves time. Like it's crucial. I'm guessing that you work internationally with artists and companies. So what can some of the challenges be of working internationally with people outside of Germany, outside of Europe, outside of the Western world? I don't know if you work with clients in the East at all. What challenges do you have in that regard?
I think you have to be aware of local and cultural nuances that might differ. For example, certain colors can have different meanings in different cultures. So that is something you definitely have to have in mind when working with, artists in different countries. And yeah, effective branding requires an understanding of the local markets also, which can require like a more extensive research.
So there are a lot of touch points for artist branding. Whether it's across the physical media or the digital media. How do you help artists to stay consistent and cohesive across all the different places where they could be discovered?
Yeah, first of all, again, by defining what the brand voice is or the tone of voice that you want to send out, and then creating basic brand elements that are being used across platforms. As I said, for example, a brand color palette, typography, like fonts that you use over and over again on the different platforms like website, newsletter, etc., because that creates, recognizability and makes people recognize your brand over time. So those are used, as I said, for like basic communication channels. So I always provide, like when I design a corporate identity, corporate design for an artist, I always provide a brand manual, for example, that outlines everything from logo dimensions to colors and typefaces. And this manual serves as a tool to ensure that everyone the artist works with stays consistent with their brand. So make sure everyone who works with the artist's brand, like graphic designers, media, etc., that they respect the brand itself. And lastly, I think it's crucial to create meaningful content throughout all platforms while keeping the artist brand and tone of voice in mind.
Yeah, great. So what do you do if you're working with an artist who has really strong visual ideas of their own that you don't necessarily agree with? They think one thing and you think, I don't think that's going to work for whatever reason. How do you deal with that conflict of ideas, I suppose?
First of all, valuing their input and showing appreciation for their ideas. I think listening is the first step. And then, of course, do my research on the brand itself, exploring the brand identity of the artist, and then give constructive feedback and strategic guidance in terms of, okay, I can explain you why this visual identity that you have in mind doesn't really work for what you want to represent or what you want to convey. So there should be an honest communication, but also finding a balance that works for everyone, I guess. Ultimately, the artist must feel comfortable with their brand and visual identity. So I think, you have to find a balance between, okay, what they want or what they feel is their visual identity, because that's also coming from inside themselves, right? So it is part of their personality. I haven't had such a clash yet, because at the end, these things like, your appearance, your feel for your visual identity is also coming from inside yourself. So it is part of your personality, and you can enhance that with different techniques or, different elements in the visual identity, I think.
Yeah. And similarly to my work as a producer in some instances, ultimately it's the client's product, right?
Exactly.
So the client is always going to be right, regardless of what I think as a producer, regardless of what you think as a branding designer. If the client says, no, I don't want that, well, okay, they don't get that then. I've had it working with clients where I say, I don't think that is working for this song because of these reasons. And the client goes, okay, but I still want it. Okay, great. You've had my opinion. You don't want my opinion, that's fine. But they're paying the bill, and it's what is going to be representing them ultimately. It's not going to be representing me anywhere near as much as it will be representing them. So
Exactly.
they will have the final say, always.
Always, yeah. That's for sure.
Yeah. So let's look forward into the future, thinking about the next 5 or 10 years or so. Do you see any big evolutions in branding or trends that are already developing? How is this space going to change, if at all?
I do think, I think it's getting even more fan-centric, immersive, and maybe even more tech-driven. Like with AI, the metaverse, and augmented reality, there will probably be even more possibilities to create like a personalized experience for fans. I guess more strategic cross-industry collaborations beyond fashion and tech, maybe. Albums might become less important, and artists will release more singles and EPs to keep engagement high. That's something that I already sense sometimes working with clients.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying about maybe doing shorter records, I think is a really good point. Fans don't necessarily need a new album. Like, if you're waiting for a new album, you might be waiting 3 years maybe for a new record, whereas it's feasible to produce a new EP every year if you work hard enough, it's a lot still, but you can. And in that sense, as you say, you can keep up with the volume. I released an EP last October, and it was 6 songs, and the response was not, "Oh, where's the rest of the album?" The response was, "We love that. That's great." The new record that I'm working on is an EP. It's 4 they're longer songs, so it's nearly 30 minutes as a record, but it's an EP still. And I don't expect people to go, "Where's the rest of the record?" They'll go, "Cool, that's great." They'll either like it or they won't. So yeah, I think albums now are becoming more of almost a vanity metric, and for artists, it's a bit of a status symbol, because if you've got an album or 2 albums, then it provides some legitimacy perhaps to your artistry, whereas EPs maybe previously were not seen as significant. Whereas now I don't think there's so much importance placed on that, because of the desire from fans to have more and more content to consume more regularly, because they're so bombarded with so much short form content that they just, they need new stuff all the time. Where previously, if you look, prior to the 21st century, they'd buy a record and they'd have the physical record and they'd listen to it, on repeat for a month until they could go and buy another record. People don't wait for anything anymore. They want to listen to a record, they'll just find it on Spotify and then they'll swap. So yeah, I love what you're saying about that cadence and keeping up with things.
Yeah, I think albums will not disappear, but I think there will be more releases before an album release, probably.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned AI and the metaverse and AR and all that kind of stuff. How do you perceive the way in which AI in particular can automate things having an impact on branding and visual storytelling?
I think AI can be a powerful tool to brainstorm ideas or create content to some degree, but the art of branding is to create this cohesive experience based on what you've defined to be your brand. And it's this thinking out of the box, doing what makes sense for your brand already, and connecting with your audience on a deeper level. And that is something that I don't see AI doing in the near future, because there's also a personality in the way you brand yourself. And I think there also needs to be stricter regulations and copyright laws to address the unauthorized use of branded content for AI training, which is a big issue.
Yeah, because it's the Wild West really at the moment, isn't it? It's just do what you want. Yeah, and it's, as you say, it's people can train and feed those AI models with whatever they want at the moment, which is going to be a challenge for lots of brands. I want to ask you about the world of NFTs and Web3 technology. You mentioned NFTs very briefly earlier on. Do you see them still playing a role in music branding moving forward, or are they a passing trend that's on the way out?
I think they will play a role still in the future, but they are not without challenges. I think they could evolve into maybe an important element of the music ecosystem, but I don't think people or everyone should just jump on this train. It's, again, a decision artists should base on their values and brand.
Yeah. Personally, I don't understand the world of NFTs. Like, I know what NFTs are and I know why they're there, but I don't personally understand why anybody would want one. I find it a really weird thing. Okay, one version of...
I'm not an expert in NFTs, I have to say.
It just feels really weird that you would want to own one digital version of a product that you could only ever look at on a screen. To me, it just makes me think, what's the point? But maybe I just don't understand it at all. But there we go. Okay, I'd like to get some advice from you. Treat me as a new artist. I'm just starting out on my artistic journey. What are the first things that I should do in terms of developing my visual brand?
Clearly define what your values, purpose, and message is. Get the big picture of what you want to really represent, because that's the foundation for all your branding efforts, and that's the foundation for any collaboration with graphic designers, photographers, creative people, copywriters.
So values. So what's important to me? What am I What am I trying to stand for, if
Exactly.
anything? Purpose, what am I trying to achieve? Am I trying to deliver a specific story or message, or am I trying to influence a
Yeah.
particular
Yeah.
space? And messaging, how am I going to communicate my
Yeah.
value and my purpose? How am I going
Yeah.
to get that across effectively?
Exactly. And also I have to add what are your core strengths? What is your unique selling point? What makes you stand out? Because that's what you want to communicate, right? You want to show people what you're especially good at. Why should they listen to your music? So if your live performances are spectacular, then you want to maybe invest in some really good live videos and photos. So that's also shifting a little bit the priorities and where you allocate your budgets, maybe. Yeah. Your values, purpose, your USP, and also get to know your audience. Like, who's your audience? Where are they? Which channels do they use to get informed about new music, to find out about new artists? Yeah. And what's their lifestyle? What are they interested in?
Yeah. So let's wind that forward. So I'm an artist now that's been going for a few years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, I don't know, a number of years. And I've decided that I want to change direction. I want to refresh my branding. Maybe I don't think that what I'm doing currently is resonating, or maybe I just want to change my messaging. I want to start talking about something else. What advice would you give me in that instance? Do I need to just come up with a whole fresh artist name, even change who I am, or can I somehow segue from one style of branding into another?
I think it depends. I think it's anyways a good idea to every once in a while check in with your branding, check in with your values, with your core. Is my branding still resonating with what I actually want to represent? And then it is again the first step to define again or redefine or check in with your brand definition. Which parts are still the same? Where are differences? What has changed? And get this definition of your brand clearly outlined. And from there, you can take a decision whether you want to just refresh your brand in a way, or if you need a whole rebrand, like from scratch. And yeah, also the artist name. Sometimes it's advisable to change it, but it all depends on really what your new brand is about.
That's awesome. I was going to ask you to finish for one final piece of advice. If you could only give me one final piece of advice, but I feel like our messaging has been really clear, and I know what you're going to say, so I'm not
Yeah.
even going to ask you that question. But if you've got a nugget, give it to me.
I think staying true to yourself is key. Uh, it doesn't mean that you have to share every part of your personality, but rather make sure your branding and message genuinely reflects you. And at the end, don't stress. It's complex, but it's not rocket science. So as you said, like try stuff out and see what happens. You can also accomplish a lot of things on your own, even without a big budget for a creative team. So yeah, I think my advice would be don't stress and stay true to yourself.
That's great advice for life, let alone for branding. Yvonne, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with me today. I'm sure people will have loved it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.